Let's dive into the Kamailio config file so you have an idea of what you'll be looking at there. Go ahead and get your editor opened up and make sure that you are switched into the branch that is named 01 basic config. Again, if you happen to be in the main branch, or if you can't see your branch name, you can type git status and you can see which branch you're on right here. I'm on 01. If you don't happen to be into that, then you could do like a git switch and you can switch into there just like that. So now that you've got that opened up, or you're in that branch, what I want you to do is I want you to go into the directory that is named Kamailio course, Kamailio default, and kamailio.cfg. So this is the Kamailio config file. And the way this is structured, at least by default, and the way that you'll see that most people use it, you could think of it split into just a couple of different sections. Now, at the very top of it, this is pulled down from Kamailio's official repo as an example file. I just happen to have it in this directory here. But the way you will normally see this file is at the very top, you are going to see a line that is hash exclamation Kamailio. That has to be there in the config file. You've got the next set of lines that just have the hash or the pound sign. These are just pure comments. And then you've got this section that's called defined values. So you could think of this as things that you want to define, maybe like you're defining a constant that you want to use later on in the configuration. In the structure of this, what is being defined is here's a constant and a value. You'll see a little bit of a different structure in some other use cases, but that's the very top of it, what you'll see. After that, you have global parameters. And yeah, these are parts of like the core of Kamailio. And you're normally going to see this in the shape of like a key value pair. So for instance, this top line here of debug equals 2, that is saying all log messages are going to be info messages. We are not logging standard error. A couple of other things that are defined there. Number of SIP routing processes that are defined. You can also see it's commented out. So right now it's listening on everything. But if I was to get rid of this, you would then see that this is now listening on UDP at this address at this port. Skip the custom parameters. The next thing you'll normally see is the modules. And the modules are part of what really make Kamailio flexible. You need to have different modules loaded to have different types of functionality. All of these loaded modules, you can find more detailed descriptions on Kamailio's website, looking up any of the module names. So I'll skip a little bit of that for now. The other part you should be aware of, though, is that each module will typically have module-specific settings, and those are set using mod param, module name, and then whatever the value might look like for it. So in this case, the JSON, RPCS, we want to do pretty format, and we want to do 1. You can see that as well, like the transaction module, mod param, TM for transaction module. We've got some timers that are set, and these are the values in milliseconds. So we'll see a lot of that throughout the config. We'll scroll down a little bit more, and this is the routing logic section. So this is where you will actually be doing development work and being able to manipulate SIP messages, set up how you want messages to route, and so forth. And there's a couple of different types of routes that you should be aware of. The first one is this request route, and this is really the main entry point into everything. And if you think of Kamailio like a scripting language, scripting or programming languages have functions or methods. Kamailio doesn't quite have that, but what it does have are routes. And so you'll see things like this where it says route, and in this case you've got request in it, which means there's a route block defined somewhere down below that looks like this. Again, think of this kind of like a function or a method. And this is where you can write some extra code. And then after everything finishes up in here, it will either exit if something is hit and you want it to exit out of the routing script right then, or it will just return right back to the main route and then proceed on with processing. There's a couple of different types of routes though that you should be aware of. There are branch routes. So whenever we really fork a transaction out, we create these different branches. You do some extra logic with branch routing. You have on reply routes. So anytime we get a response code back, those will get processed there. And then we have failure routes. So if a call or a request happens to fail, like you get a 503, you can define how you want that routing to be managed. So that's a very high level overview of the Kamailio configuration. Let's get a couple of things set up and make a call, and then we'll look at some of the SIP headers and what's happening when we use that just default Kamailio config. So I'm using something called iTerm. There's other ways you could do this depending on your operating system you're using. I think you can use like mputty. If you're using Linux, there's other terminal emulators you can use, but I just have multiple terminal sessions set up all on my server where I'm doing development. It makes it a little bit easier for me to see everything that's going on. So for me, I'm going to first start up sngrep. Now I already have, if I do docker ps, I do have everything running. So I can jump into that sngrep server again by doing docker exec-it, and then I want to do sngrep, and I'm just going to go right into bash. All right, so I've got that up, and then I type sngrep, and now I've got the sngrep window up. The container that is set up for PJSUA, which is going to be what we use to make some test calls, it's a little bit different. You have to attach to the container. The trade-off though is after we break away from attaching, it's actually going to kill the container. It's not a big problem. We just restart it. But let's start off with a container that is named external, or PJSUA external. So, or sorry, B2B external 01. So let's do that one. So what we'll do is docker attach and then the name, and hit enter twice. And now we're at this little window here, which essentially is a Linux softphone. So from this menu, I'll be able to make a couple of calls, and just for the sake of it, I'm going to keep it pretty simple for now, just so we can see some messages show up. So we're first going to make a new call, and we're going to do that by doing a lowercase m within the back-to-back UA screen. It's going to give us a couple of options. I don't have any buddies set up in the buddy list, so we are just going to enter in an address, and we're just going to type in like SIP user at host. Now, before I do that, I want to show you one thing that is happening, just so you have an idea of why. All right, so in the Docker Compose file, there is a command that runs immediately once this container starts up. And I am passing a parameter that sets an outbound proxy, which in this case, this is the public IP of the Kamailio instance. When you're setting an outbound SIP proxy, it's exactly what it sounds like. You are just expecting all of your traffic to first go to one specific proxy, and after that, let the proxy do what it will. Otherwise, you would need to make sure you have everything entered into here perfectly, like the host name, the address, and so forth. For simplicity, I just wanted to make it kind of a dumbed down version for now. So going back to this window here where we have the back-to-back UA, make a call, we've got SIP, so the protocol, the user, and then the host. We're going to hit enter, and then we can kind of ignore, I guess, a little bit what's happening down at the bottom here, and just go focus on what we have visible in SNGREP. So in this case, you can see that for whatever reason, the call was rejected. We don't know why yet, but since you have this line highlighted, hit enter, and we'll actually be able to see some of the SIP messages. A couple of things with SNGREP. If the text for the actual like invite or SIP message is too big, you can hit 0 and it's going to shrink it down on as to how much of the screen it'll take up. You can hit 9, it'll make it bigger. I'll make this one bigger since it's pretty straightforward. Now, once you're in here, you can hit the down arrow and you'll navigate and be able to see all of these different things here. But let's start off with this initial invite. So at the top line, going back to what we talked about on the SIP section, this is, we're just defining the method. The method to start a call is an invite. We're saying, hey, this is a SIP call. This is the user. This is the host. A couple of other things to keep in mind. So we have a from header that is set by the UAC that's initiating the call. And you can see we also have a tag here, which, going back to the SIP section of the course, the quick overview, I mentioned that a tag is going to be set in that from header. But what you notice is we do not have a to tag yet. We have all these other headers that are here, as we discussed in the past. But let's do the down arrow and get down to the 100 trying. So this one came straight from the proxy. 100 trying, just to let us know that it's still trying to do something. And then if we go down a little bit further, we can see that we got an unresolvable destination. Basically, it just can't figure out where it needs to send this call to. But what you should be able to see is there is a tag on there. So now that we have an actual response, like a non-provisional response from the other side, we now have what is required to make a call dialog. And a dialog is just another word for a call. It's a couple of parameters that define an actual call is happening. And those parameters, it's a from tag, it's a to tag, and a call ID. And so this is really creating this one dialog. On the other hand, what we also have is just a transaction. And as a SIP is a transactional communication protocol, every time we make a request and we get a response back, that would be counting as one transaction. So, or not every response, but until we get to a final response. In this case, a 400 series would be the final response here. So yeah, the invite down to the 478, that is one transaction. An ACK itself, that's its own transaction. That's a little bit of a different type of method. But yeah, we got an unresolvable destination for whatever reason. Not quite sure why yet. But we at least have an idea of this first call, and we can start troubleshooting a little bit. In the next video, we'll walk through the Kamailio config and discuss a little bit more here. Let's leave this screen available so you can go back and look at the SIP message, but make sure you have it set up so you can also look at the actual Kamailio config. In the last video, we looked at a call that failed, right? The call failed after we sent an initial invite. We got a 478 unresolvable destination. So let's start walking through the Kamailio config and let's just see if we can troubleshoot what exactly happened here. So the call processing is going to begin with the request route. And after that, we follow through in a sequential order. So the first thing we do is with the initial request, we look at this routing block that's named request init. And let's just see what this would do. So the first step that this one is taking, it is saying if there is a pseudo variable that is called the user agent header. If that contains friendly scanner or SIP CLI or VAC SIP user agent, then it's just going to exit out of this routing block. So this pseudo variable is just saying to look at the user agent header, which is this one here. So the user agent here is PJ SUA v2.8. That doesn't match up with what is defined here. It's not friendly scanner, it's not SIP CLI, and it's not VAX SIP user agent. So we proceed. The next thing that happens is it's going to look at the max forward header. And it's going to look and see if it is 10 or less. So if that header is set less than that, it's going to say 483, too many hops. We know that didn't happen, but let's look at it anyways. So we want to look at the max forward header. In this case, it is 70. And the max forward header, that is going to get used to prevent loops from happening. That way, if something continuously is just making a circle around, every time it goes through an entity, this number is going to decrease by 1. So over time, it's going to work its way down towards 0. In this case, on this proxy, if it's anything less than 10, we're just going to say, hey, there's too many hops. We're not going to process it. So we know that didn't happen, though. All right, we have a max forward header set of 70. If the method is options, well, we know right off the bat this one doesn't apply, as this method is an invite, so we don't have to worry about that. And there's also a thing that's happening called a sanity check. Basically, Kamailio is just looking at the actual structure of the SIP message and make sure that it is conforming with what is defined by the RFC. So if any of these are hit, it's going to exit out, and that's basically the end of the routing block. But we know that didn't happen. So let's go back to here. So the next thing it's going to look at is, was this method a cancel? We know it wasn't a cancel, it was an invite, so we're going to proceed. Was the original one an ACK? Or sorry, is it not an ACK? The exclamation meaning not. So this was not an ACK, it was an invite. So it's going to do a couple of things. It's got this T pre-check transmissions, and then it's going to do a couple of other steps there. There weren't any retransmissions going on. We'll look deeper on that later. The next thing is it's going to say, was this message in dialogue? So when a message is in dialogue, it means it's occurring for a call that is already established. In other words, you've already sent out that initial invite. You've got that 200 OK. You've got the ACK. You now have a dialogue that's established. An in-dialogue message would be something more like a buy, or it could be a re-invite. We know that wasn't the case because the call wasn't established. There's a couple of other things that did happen. The routing script here is going to look for any headers that were named route. So let's see, when we sent this invite out, we did have a route header that was predefined. This time it only did a single hop. However, if this went somewhere else, we would see that this route header is completely stripped off. But we didn't quite have that happen yet. What we're also going to see is this method an invite or a subscribe? If so, we want to do a record route. Again, if we had an additional leg on this one, you would see that we would have, this would be record routed. Yeah, it's a little hard to show on this. I'll show another example later that will actually show what it'll look like if it's got a record route, but we know it didn't happen there. In this case, this is just some extra things that are happening within Kamailio. So if the method is invite, then we're going to set a flag. If you remember from a little bit earlier, this is something that's defined toward that top of the config file. In that case, we're going to do something related to accounting. We're also going to do a check if the request URI is null. then we're going to say, sorry, this is it's incomplete. We didn't have that happen either. There's also going to be a couple of things that happen related to the destination user part of it. I think of that more like the to header. And if that is the case, we're going to do a route relay, which means we're going to go to a completely different routing block. This one is right beneath here, so we can just take a look there. So is method invite or buy or subscribe or update. If it's a branch route, it's going to handle some things related to the branch. If the method is an invite, subscribe, or an update, and we don't have on reply route set, then it's going to go into this like manage reply routing block. If it's an invite and we don't have a failure route set, then we're going to do on a failure. We're going to call this manage failure block. And we're going to do another step and then exit out. In this case, there's nothing that's really matching up other than maybe this failure route. As it failed, right? We had a 400 series response. So we've got the failure route. We're going to check if it's canceled, and then we're just going to exit out. But there's nothing that's really defining why it's failing. In the next video, we're going to make another call, and we're going to define a different URI, and we're going to see if it looks a little bit different. In this video, we're going to make another call, and we're going to try to send the call to this one back-to-back user agent internal 01 that has the address of 172.16.254.100. So let's just make sure you still have everything set up. You've got SN grep up and running. You have one window that is connected to the external back-to-back user agent, and you don't need this window up. I'm just looking at Docker Compose so that I can get the address and make sure it's there. But let's attempt to make another new call. So we're going to hit M in the soft phone window. We're going to type in SIP. Let's just do user at 172.16.254.100. And we're going to throw the port on just for a good measure. In this case, we're going to hit enter. And you can see up toward the top here, we've made a call, or we've made a call attempt, and you can see it looks a little bit different this time at least. Like if we look at the ladder diagram here, we have the first rung, this one that is coming from the UAC. We've got this one that is one of the IPs that's on the Kamailio server. And then you can see we're trying to send this over toward 172.16.254.100, but it still looks like the call isn't actually getting received. We just have a bunch of retransmissions. But at least on this call, we can look and we can see that Kamailio has done a couple of things to the invite. So if we look at this initial invite, you can see we don't have anything like a record route header, and we only have one single via header currently. If we go down a little bit to where Kamailio actually processed the message, you can see there's a few things that are different. First of all, we now have a record or record route header. This header is just saying anytime a transaction or a method needs to take place, you need to make sure that this proxy remains in route. That's what this is stating. It has this parameter on here that is LR, which stands for loose routing. There's two different types of routing. You've got loose routing and you've got strict routing. If you have strict routing, every time that an invite passes through a proxy, the proxy is going to be making some changes onto the URI, usually going to be changing the host portion of it or the IP. Since we're using loose routing, that doesn't need to happen. One other thing I want to point out, or two other things. We have a second via header that's now added on. The initial one only had this IP on it. We now have a topmost via header that was added on, and this one has the IP address of that Kamailio instance. Another thing you're going to see is that the max forwards has been decreased by 1. It's now down to 69. However, the call is still not making it over toward where we're expecting it to go. At the end, we end up getting a request timeout. Kamailio basically just says, hey, I'm not going to process this message any longer. I can't recall if we have a 408 defined in here or if this is just doing it by default based on the transaction time. Let me just double check. Yeah, there's no 408 defined here, but there is a setting that Kamailio is going off of, which is in the transaction module. So we're going to time it out, in this case, at about 30 seconds. And so that's why you see that 408 that's happening there. But unfortunately, we still don't have a call that's making it through. I can give a little bit of a spoiler as to why it's happening. The reason for that is if you're looking inside of this Docker Compose file, you can see that this IP here is on the network named internal, and the call where it was originating is on the network that's named external. And at the moment, we don't actually have Kamailio set up to bridge between these two different IPs, so it's just going to fail in that sense. In the next video, what we will do is we will spin up another container that will have another external back-to-back user agent. We'll make a call, so the call will end up going from the B2B UA, it'll hit Kamailio, and then it'll route out to the second back-to-back user agent that is on the public side. See you in the next video. In this video, we are going to create another external back-to-back user agent, and then we're going to come across something interesting in the Kamailio config that's going to be causing our calls to fail. But let's start off by creating that additional back-to-back user agent. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to your docker compose.yaml file, and I want you to find the entry for back-to-back UA external 01. Essentially, I want you to just copy this section, and you need to make sure that it is lined up in the same spots, like the same level of indents. But what I want you to do is name this back-to-back user agent 02, and also on the container name, change that part of it. Since this isn't really exposed to the host or anything else, we can just get rid of this port line. In terms of the network, we can't have two devices on the same IP address within the same network. So let's change this one to 192.168.254.101. And the command that we run, I want to actually use something a little bit different. I want this to do an auto answer, and I want it to do an auto answer and give a 200 OK. So I'm just going to steal this from back-to-back UA internal 02 and replace that section there. So just to give it another double check, back-to-back UA external 02, name there as well. We changed the IP to 101, and we're expecting an auto answer with a 200 OK. So let's just take, actually let me switch to the bigger terminal window. That might make a little more sense for clarity. So we'll do a docker ps. You can see that what I have running right now, I've got back-to-back UA, internal 01, external 01, sngrep, back-to-back UA, internal 02, and Kamailio Edge. So to enable or turn on this new container, we just need to run docker-compose up, and we want to only do a single, this is actually internal, I want this to be external 02, and we're going to put the -d flag just so it runs in the background. And since we already have everything that's needed to run that container, it's quite quick. right? So we now have back-to-back UA external O2. And you can see this is a little different. We don't have ports that are defined that are set up there. So let's connect back into SNgrep on this window. So again, docker exec it SNgrep for the name of the container, just like that. And we're going to go bash on this one. And then we're going to type SNgrep. And going back to our dialing window, we're going to make a new call. We're going to do M to make a new call. We're going to do SIP colon 123 at 192.168.254.101. And we're going to put port 5060 in here. Make sure that looks good. And we're going to fire off this new call. So let's go back up and let's look at this actual ladder diagram. I'm going to shrink down the size of the SIP message there. All right, so again, it looks like this call it hasn't yet, but it's going to time out, right? So if we're looking at this, we can see there's a couple of interesting things that are here. At the very top line, we can see some ports defined, right? So we've got 192.168.254.100. My call originated from port 5060. I sent it over to the Kamailio server at port 5060. But something kind of odd is if we look at the IP that's listed here, or more specifically the socket, I should say, we have :9. So that seems a little odd, right? So if we go down into our actual invite here, I'm going to go full screen. If you look at the very top line, it's for some odd reason, it is going to UDP port 9. And we're not looking at that at the actual SIP layer. It's something down lower that is actually changing that to be :9. So let's take a quick look at our Kamailio config. Let's go back into, let me just reload it here. And again, I am under Kamailio course, Kamailio default, kamailio.cfg. And we saw that it was :9, right? Let's just take a quick look. If anything shows up with :9, and sure enough, it does. So what we're looking at is this DU line. Let me pull up a window really quick and drag this over so you can see it. So if we're looking at the Kamailio cookbook, what you can see is this DU pseudo variable. That's what these are all called in the Kamailio scripting. We've got these variables. They're called pseudo variables, at least in Kamailio config. But you can see there's this one that is DU to set the destination URI. If we just take like a really quick look at something else within here, you can see there's one way you can format it. So you've got SIP, the host, the port, the transport. You can set some things like that. But what this little DU pseudo variable is also doing is it's allowing us to change a lower level network setting where we are changing the port. It's not the actual port that's in the SIP message. It's lower level, right? We're looking more at layer 4 rather than the layer 7 part of it. So we're going to do something really easy, and we are just going to comment out this line. And we could do a comment with just a pound sign or a hash sign. What you then need to do is save your configuration. I've got VS Code set up to autosave on my part. And then we can just switch back over. Let me find a window here where you guys can see it all right. And I am going to just restart the Kamailio container. So the name of the container is Kamailio-edge. So we're going to do that really easily with docker restart Kamailio-edge. All right, that container has now been restarted, and essentially it would have taken in that new Kamailio configuration. There's ways to restart Kamailio directly from the command line, but when you're using containers, you may as well just restart the container. It's just as quick. All right, so let's look at my Docker compose again, just to grab the IP, external. I want external O2, and we've got the IP address of 192.168.254.101. We're going to make a call. We can see the previous one failed. Let's see what happens this time. Once again, in the soft phone window, hit M, enter, and then we're going to type in the address. We'll just do SIP 123 at 192.168.254.101:5060. And this one looks a little bit different. If you look at the top, it actually says in call. So this one was actually answered, right? Like, we've got our invite, we got a 200 OK, we have an ACK. It seems like it's going all right. So in theory, we can go back into this soft phone window. We can hit H or a lowercase h, and that's going to hang up the call. Looking up at your SN-grep window, it looks like everything went well that time, right? We've got the 100, or sorry, the invite. We did a 100 trying. We had that user agent set up to auto answer, so it set that 200 OK. Immediately after we received the 200 OK at the UAC, we send off an ACK just to acknowledge that we did receive it, and we stop doing all these retransmissions. At that point, the dialogue is now established. If we actually had audio, in theory, the audio would be flowing, assuming that the C equals lines are reachable on both sides. And then we hung up the call by sending a bye message. Kamailio received the bye. It sent the bye over to the back-to-back user agent. The B2B UA sent a 200 OK, and it said, yeah, this is in response to the bye message. And there we go. We actually have our first successful call that happened. So just to recap in this video, we set up a new back-to-back user agent. We started that up in Docker, and then we restarted. We made a small change on the Kamailio configuration. We restarted the config. We made another call, and now we actually have that first working call. Next video, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into some other things on the Kamailio config. In the last video, you saw that we commented out a line from the config where the du pseudo variable was being manipulated. Essentially, it was changing it so that we were sending it to a different port. However, it didn't actually show up in the SIP message that the port was different where it would be sent to. Now, Kamailio has a lot of pseudo variables. Personally, I don't remember all of these, and I often need to go back and reference what different pseudo variables often refer to. And some of them can be a little bit tricky. Like, they are case sensitive. So there might be a case where you see something like this, where it's $RU, and you might also see something where it's like $lowercase r, lowercase u, and those are different things that you're going to see. So if you just look over at the side here, you can see there are just tons of different pseudo variables that you can use to manipulate various parts of a SIP message. I mean, I'm still scrolling down, and I am not too, there we go. Finally at the end of the pseudo variable part, and then there's different things that can be manipulated beyond that. But there's tons and tons of pseudo variables. So in this video, we are going to play around a little bit with manipulating the request URI. So let's switch over to our editors and let's get started. Since we're not really doing development work yet, I'm not going to put this manipulation in a spot that I think would really be the best. We're just going to do it right after we first do this request init routing block and process things there. So if we switch over and look back at the pseudo variables. As I mentioned, there's sometimes things with a lowercase u, other times things with an uppercase u. So we just want to double check what part we actually want to manipulate. So luckily these are all in alphabetical order, and it's a little small on the screen, but so in RU, both of them lowercase, that means the entire request URI, versus in RU where the U is uppercase, that is just the username portion of the request URI. Let's start off with really just modifying that part of it. So again, switch back over to your editor, and we're just going to add a pretty simple line into the code. We're going to do like $R uppercase U, and we are going to change that to, let's just name it Alice. We're going to use a very common SIP RFC name. At the end of the line, you do need to put a line terminator, which is going to be a semicolon. So we've now essentially manipulated that part of the message. What we next need to do is just restart our container again. Kamailio Edge, Docker restart Kamailio Edge. That'll make sure that config file is applied. And we're going to go back over to our soft phone, and we're just going to make another call. If you happen to have been closed out of any of the windows, I'm out of sngrep. Let's just start it again, and let's make that new call. So we're going to do SIP : we're going to name this Bob at 192.168.254.101 5060. Oh, sorry, I was in the wrong spot. Let me try that again. SIP Bob at 192.168.254.101 5060. All right, so in this case, let me shrink that over a bit. Again, you can see we now have this ladder diagram. We've got the originating party over here, the UAC. We've got the proxy, and we have the other side that is going to answer the call. You can also see in the initial invite, we did set the RURI as Bob, or the user portion of it is Bob. And then if we go after the proxy has processed it, you could see that Alice is now defined there. So that's just a quick example of how you can use the pseudo variables to manipulate different parts of a SIP message. When working with SIP traffic, it's pretty common that you're going to actually add headers once a request enters your network. Now, a lot of headers get added on their own. Like you've seen Kamailio add a route header, you've seen additional via headers. However, there's a type of header that's really common to like manually add. And that type of header is known as an X header. So what X headers are is they're used to transport non-standard information. To give an example, I've used X headers as soon as I receive an invite from like an external party where maybe they're passing me a different X header from their side, maybe a specific like company ID. And I'll then take that on my side. I'll look up the customer based on what they have sent as the X header, do like a database lookup. I'll then enrich the invite with additional information based on what I pulled from my database before I send that over to like a back-to-back user agent or some other call processing application so that it has some extra logic on how it could handle the call. You'll see X headers all over the place once you start actually building things and looking deeper into SIP. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to add an X source IP header to an outgoing invite. So basically we receive that initial invite. We don't have any X header added onto it. Kamailio is then going to add this header that's going to be X source-IP. And we're going to do it a little bit differently this time, and by doing it within a route block. So let's make sure that you have your editor opened up, and let's get started. So if we want to build out a route block, let's first think about what the requirements are that we want to actually build here. So I'm just going to leave a comment for now. So if we want to call another route block, we need to type route, and then we need to basically tell it which route block we want to call. We're going to make a generic routing block that is named set underscore, we'll do it X headers. So we'll make a route block that does that. All right, so now we've defined where we're going to call that. Now we need to actually build the header or the routing block itself. So we can really put these anywhere. I'm just going to go down right before we get to the branch routes and I'll add it in there. So for this, we're going to do it with route and then square brackets and then the exact same name that we set in the past, which is X headers. Okay, and then we need to put all of this routing information within a couple of curly braces. So what we're going to do is we're going to first check if it's an invite so that it only gets added on to invite requests. So here's my comment, check if invite, else, do else return. All right, so to check if it's an invite, we're going to do it with this syntax, if. So we're going to do an exclamation mark to basically negate this. Say if it is not, is method of invite. Make sure I've got all of my, okay, I've got enough parentheses. Oh, actually, that messed up here. Let me fix that. Then we're going to return. And in this case, we're going to return a -1. Personal thing I like to do is if I'm doing any processing within a routing block, I like to give a return. So a negative means like false, positive value means that it succeeded. You can set different values on here. You can set different numerical values, and then when you're in the main routing block, you can check things. I just think it's nice to actually have a return value here. So next what we need to do is we need to call a function or a module that is going to do this append header function. And the format of this is we're going to type in the header name that we want, and we said we wanted to do an x-source IP. Actually, let me space this out. Okay, so we want to add the header like this. We want to add the source IP of where this came from. So that's going to be the SI pseudo variable. And then we're going to do a \r\n just to do like a carriage return and make it clean there. We also want to define which header this is going to come after. In this case, I want it to be after the call-id header. All right, so after that, I also want to return something if it actually processed, and I just want to make that a return one. All right, so let's switch over then to the terminal. And let's give this a test based on what we currently have. So let's just make a call really quick. Make a new call to sip:123 at 192.168.254.101. And we just want to double check that we do not have an X header added after the call ID. Right now we do not. All right, so that's good. So then what we want to do is let's switch back over to the editor. We want to make a very quick change and just uncomment the line that we added here, where we define the route block. If I can find it here. Okay, that line there. I'm going to uncomment it. Cool, it's gone normal. What we then also need to make sure we're doing, I think I forgot to add some of these on within that within that routing block, we need to make sure we've got the line terminations in there. Let me go down really quick and just double check those. Yeah, so go to do these return. All right. Okay, that should be fine now. I think I will need to add, yeah, I think we're good with that. So then let's do a reload on the Kamailio config. And again, we're just going to do that with docker restart Kamailio-edge. If I can type. Kamailio edge. All right. So let's make another call then. Actually, let me hang up this one first. It's going to give some output. Doesn't really matter there. It's trying to send a by. Session doesn't exist, but that's perfectly fine. We'll make a new call. SIP : 123 at 192.168.254.101. That call does not want to get fired off. All right, let's exit it out. Let's try that again. Actually, let's first double check that Kamailio is running. There may have been an error that happened in the config. So we're going to do docker logs Kamailio-edge. Yeah. Okay. So there was an error in the config there. Let's see, which line does it say that it was on? See here, in config line 279, column 40. Let's look at that really quick. There's what, line 279? 279. So something about that it didn't like. It might be that I need to actually put quotes around, it said column 40. That's column 39 right there. Now, let me just put this in quotes really quick. And let's see if that does the trick there. All right, let's restart it again. Look at the logs. Docker PS. Is it running? Okay, it looks like Kamailio Edge is now running. So got that part, needed to put that in quotes. So let's do SIP 123 at 192.168.254.101. All right, I'm going to just hang this up before I look at it. But you can see in the initial invite here, there is no X header added in. If we go down to the invite after Kamailio processed it, you can then see that we now have an X header, and the X header lists the source IP that sent that invite. So that's how you can easily add new headers using Kamailio. You want to use the append header or append HF function. That's part of one of the modules that we've already imported, so it's pretty easy in that part. Other times you might have to call a different function that is part of a module that you haven't already imported. So in that case, you do have to add that to the load module, but here, very straightforward. In Kamailio, it's very easy to manipulate any of the headers. Now, something to keep in mind is that manipulating to and from headers can be risky. So when you modify these headers in one direction, you'd need to make sure that it's normalized back on the way out. Now the reason for that is that some SIP endpoints don't know how to handle that, and they'll return a SIP 481 transaction doesn't exist. In more of a best case scenario, the transaction will complete. However, the to and from headers won't really show what you're expecting there. So when you start troubleshooting it, it might look very odd. In this video, we're going to modify the from header of the original invite, and then we're going to actually send the by on this call from the UAS that answered the call. So let's get started. So we're going to do this pretty easily here. We're going to make a one-line change. So we are going to modify the from URI using the pseudo variable that is f and a lowercase u. What you want to do is you want to type this in just like I have here. You want to do a double quote sip modified at, and then double quote plus, and then double quote localhost double quote plus, and then another pseudo variable for source port or s lowercase p. Make sure you put your line termination at the end, the semicolon. Once you have that typed in, switch back over toward your terminal, and you'll want to again restart the Kamailio container. I'm going to do it, just there. And I'm going to do Docker PS, make sure that Kamailio Edge is actually running. All right. Next, what you'll want to do is you'll want to reattach, if you're not already attached, onto your UAC. In this case, that will be the external client, or sorry, attach back-to-back UA external 01. That is the one there we want to attach to in one window. Hit enter twice. Make sure that loads up. Okay, and then we also want to attach to external 02. That way we can have the UAS that answers the call, and we can terminate it from over there. All right, so let's start off by making our call then. Do m sip again, let's do like 123 at, and then the IP 192.168.254.101. Going to throw on the port just for good measure there. All right, and the scenario that the UAS is going off of, it still auto answers. So you can see now that I do have one active call. If we look at the ladder diagram, we'll see that the original from just said sip, then the IP address, and then the tag. The to was sip 123, exactly as we typed in. After it was modified, you can now see that sip, it's from modified at localhost 5060, and then the tag there, and then the to header exactly as we put it in. You can scroll down, you can see we sent that 200 OK, the call has been answered, and we now have an active session that's taking place, right? Both of these are going to say that there's one active call. Now, what happens in SIP is when you have a request that comes from the other side, the from and to headers are actually going to flip around. So we can do this by either sending a reinvite or just by sending a by to end the call. In this case, we'll just send a by. So do a lowercase h on the UAS and then hit enter. All right, let's go ahead and just refresh what you have in SNgrep and find that original by that was sent. So what you will see here is that the from header on the by is now defining what was originally sent out as the to header when the call was first set up. You'll also see that the to header is now set to this modified value that we already set. Now what's interesting though is because we had a different from header that was set because we sent the by coming from the UAS, we now have both the from and the to showing as modified at localhost. If this back-to-back user agent didn't quite know how to understand this, it would have just sent a SIP 481 transaction doesn't exist. I have seen that a countless number of times, whether it's modifying things on Kamailio, modifying SIP headers through header manipulation rules on Acme packet SBCs or the different rules for modifying headers on an audio codes. I've seen it so many times where you end up with this 481 transaction doesn't exist, and that can really cause some havoc to the calls that are in your network. So if you have this 481 transaction doesn't exist, sometimes that might mess up the way calls are billed because you won't actually see the value of how long the call was active for. It can be quite a challenge to deal with that. And it really just depends on the way that the UAC or the back-to-back user agent that's set up, how it is going to actually process that. In this case, we ended up with the best case scenario, right? We just had the to and the from header. They both ended up being modified. Yeah, it makes it a little strange to look at it in that sense, but that is definitely something to keep in mind though, is again, if you happen to send a SIP request from the party that answered the call, it could be a buy, it could be an update, it could be a re-invite, those from and to headers are going to flip around.